January 2017, Los Angeles, the land of dreams. But for one family, this winter afternoon would turn into a living nightmare. 16-year-old Isabella Sementilli came home to find her father Fabio slumped in his chair by the pool, covered in blood. He had been stabbed to death. On the night of the killing, two mysterious strangers were seen fleeing the property. A series of local robberies and the disappearance of Fabio's Porsche made it seem like a robbery gone wrong. A violent, lethal robbery. But something didn't fit. Fabio was still wearing his luxury watch worth $8,000 untouched. Nothing of real value had been taken. This wasn't about money. Someone had come for him, and only him. Behind the walls of the Sementilli mansion, dark secrets were hiding. Let's dive into the twisted story of Monica and Fabio Sementilli. Before we get going, don't forget to hit that subscribe button down below to keep up with all the latest true crime cases like this one. January 23rd, 2017. It was a quiet Monday afternoon in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. The sun was still high, the neighborhood calm. The kind of day where nothing extraordinary seemed possible. But inside a luxurious home at the end of a cul-de-sac, horror was waiting to be discovered. At 5:07 p.m., Isabella Sementilli pulled into the driveway. She was only 16, a high school student coming home after a long day of classes. For her, this house was supposed to be a place of comfort, a place where her father, Fabio, would often greet her with a warm smile. But as she stepped through the door, that comfort vanished. The house was silent, too silent. Drawers were pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor, cushions tossed aside. A scene of chaos, like someone had torn through the home in a hurry. And then, outside by the pool, Isabella saw him, her father. Fabio Sementilli was slumped in a chair, covered in blood. His face pale, his body motionless. He had been stabbed again and again, his life stolen in an act of sheer brutality. Isabella screamed, the kind of scream that comes from the gut, raw and broken. She dialed 911 with trembling hands, begging for help, but deep down, she knew it was already too late. When officers arrived minutes later, the backyard became a crime scene. Yellow tape went up. Neighbors gathered, whispering in disbelief. How could something like this happen here in such an upscale and quiet part of Los Angeles? Detectives began piecing together what little they had. To the untrained eye, it looked like a burglary gone wrong. The ransacked rooms, the missing Porsche from the driveway, the DVR ripped from the home security system. But to seasoned investigators, something didn't add up. The drawers weren't just tossed. They were staged, too neat, too deliberate, as if someone had wanted it to look like a break-in. And why stab a man more than a dozen times if the motive was just theft? Burglars take what they want and run. They don't linger. They don't kill with such rage. Most important part, Fabio was still wearing $8,000 watch on his hand. They did not take it. This wasn't a robbery. This was personal. And the man who lay bleeding by the pool wasn't just anyone. Fabio Sementilli was a celebrity hairstylist, a respected figure in the beauty industry. Known worldwide, admired for his artistry, Fabio had built a life many envied. He was successful, wealthy, and adored by his family and friends. But now, his glamorous world was shattered. Detectives began their work the way they always do, start with the people closest to the victim. And at the top of that list was Fabio's wife, Monica. When Monica arrived home and saw the flashing lights, she collapsed into tears. To neighbors, she looked like a devastated widow. She wept. She clutched her daughters. She asked the same questions everyone else was asking. Who would do this? Why Fabio? But to detectives watching closely, something about her grief felt strange. Her tears came quickly, yes, but so did her questions. Questions not about who killed her husband, but about insurance, about money, about what would happen next. For now, investigators said nothing. They let her cry, but they made note of it, because grief is one thing, but grief mixed with calculation, that's something else entirely. Still, Monica wasn't the only possible lead. Detectives had to consider every angle. Was this a home invasion? A jealous rival? A random act of violence in an otherwise quiet neighborhood? The missing Porsche was their first tangible clue. If they could find it, maybe it would point them toward the killer. Within 24 hours, they did. The luxury car was found abandoned on a side street not far from the house. Whoever had taken it hadn't gone far. Inside the vehicle, forensic teams dusted for prints and collected samples. At first, it seemed like a dead end. No wallet, no weapon, no obvious trace of the killer. But what they did find, just a tiny drop of blood, would change everything. It wasn't Fabio's. It wasn't Monica's. It belonged to someone else entirely. And when that DNA was run through the system, detectives suddenly found themselves staring at a name that no one had expected. A name that would turn the case upside down. The DNA match came back, and with it, a name. A name detective didn't expect to see tied to the brutal murder of Fabio Sementilli. The man connected to that tiny drop of blood was Robert Baker. He wasn't some faceless burglar. He wasn't a stranger who got lucky breaking into the wrong house. No, Robert Baker was a convicted felon with a violent history. Assault, drugs, a life marked by run-ins with the law. He was the kind of man you wouldn't expect to cross paths with someone like Fabio Sementilli, a polished celebrity hairstylist with global recognition. So how did their worlds collide? That was the question detectives couldn't shake. They started digging deeper, not just into Baker's life, but into Fabio's. Because sometimes, the truth about a victim lies not in their public image, but in the private world they try to keep hidden. And Fabio's public image was dazzling. Born in Toronto, he had risen to fame through pure talent and charisma. He wasn't just a hairstylist, he was a master of his craft. A man who could transform anyone with a pair of scissors and a vision. He worked with celebrities, mentored young artists, and became an executive at Wella, one of the biggest names in the beauty industry. Colleagues admired him. Friends adored him. His family, at least from the outside, seemed perfect. Fabio and his wife Monica had been together for years. They lived in luxury, raised 2 daughters, and posted smiling photos that painted the picture of happiness. They had it all: money, travel, status, and love. Or so it seemed. Behind the walls of their Woodland Hills mansion, cracks were beginning to show. Monica, investigators learned, wasn't as satisfied as the world believed. She was restless, unfulfilled. While Fabio traveled for work and basked in his professional success, Monica often stayed home. She told friends she felt lonely, isolated, like she was fading into the background of her husband's shining spotlight. And in that loneliness, someone else slipped into her life. That someone was Robert Baker. At first glance, the two couldn't have been more different. Fabio, polished, respected, adored. Robert, rough, criminal, the kind of man with danger written all over him. But that danger, that recklessness, that was exactly what drew Monica in. Detectives began piecing together her secret life. Phone records, texts, meetings she hadn't told anyone about. The evidence pointed to more than just an affair. This wasn't about romance. It was about conspiracy. Monica and Robert weren't just lovers. They were plotting, whispering in the shadows, sharing thoughts not of love, but of freedom. And for Monica, freedom meant one thing: a life without Fabio. But why? Was it resentment? Greed? Desperation? The answer lay buried in the details. Insurance policies, financial struggles Monica kept hidden, promises of wealth and independence, if only one obstacle: her husband was out of the way. For detectives, suspicion was becoming certainty. This was no random burglary. This was no tragic mistake. This was a plan. And yet, one question still lingered in the air. How far would Monica and Robert go to make that plan a reality? The answer would come soon. Because as investigators pulled phone records and surveillance footage, a chilling timeline began to take shape. A timeline that didn't just suggest Monica's involvement, it practically screamed it. Detectives spread the phone records across their desks like puzzle pieces. Line after line of calls, texts, encrypted messages, thousands of them. At first glance, it looked impossible to sort through. But when they mapped the data against Fabio's final weeks of life, a disturbing pattern emerged. Robert Baker and Monica Sementilli weren't just in contact. They were in constant contact. Morning, afternoon, night, sometimes dozens of times in a single hour. The kind of obsessive communication that spoke not of casual romance, but of something darker. And it wasn't just words. Surveillance footage from the days leading up to January 23rd showed Monica running errands, meeting Robert in parking lots, slipping away when Fabio wasn't around. But the most chilling detail wasn't how often they spoke, it was what they discussed. Hidden in the flurry of calls were conversations about Fabio's schedule, when he traveled, when he was home, what time Isabella got out of school, where the family kept their valuables, even the login information for the house's security cameras. Piece by piece, Monica was handing Robert the blueprint to her husband's life, and soon, his death. The timeline of January 23rd told the story in brutal clarity. That afternoon, Fabio had been relaxing at home. The weather was warm, the pool sparkling in the sunlight. His daughter would be home from school later, but for now, he was alone. Monica, detectives discovered, had deliberately left the house earlier that day. She went shopping at Target. Receipts and surveillance video confirming her alibi. She had even encouraged Isabella to run errands after school, ensuring that no one would be there when Robert arrived. At roughly the same time, Robert Baker wasn't alone either. He had brought someone with him, an old friend named Christopher Austin, a man with a troubled past of his own. Together, the two slipped into the Sementilli home. The details of what happened next were pieced together from forensics, confessions, and the bloody trail Robert left behind. Fabio, caught off guard, had no chance to defend himself. The attack was sudden, violent, and merciless. More than a dozen stab wounds, many to the face and neck, wounds that spoke not of efficiency but of rage. When it was over, Robert and Austin set about staging the scene. They pulled drawers, scattered clothes, ripped out the DVR, and stole Fabio's Porsche to make it look like a burglary. But what they couldn't hide was Robert's mistake. In the chaos, he cut himself. His blood dripped in the Porsche, a single drop that tied him to the crime forever. By the time Isabella walked through the door, her father's killers were already gone. For detectives, the evidence was overwhelming. Monica's alibi was too perfect, Robert's DNA was indisputable, and the thousands of phone calls between them left little doubt about the depth of their connection. But when confronted, Monica denied everything. She said Robert was obsessed with her, that she never wanted any part of it. She claimed he acted alone, fueled by jealousy and delusion. Detectives weren't convinced, because buried in those phone records, in the surveillance footage, in the financial documents, was something Monica couldn't explain away. She had motive. Fabio's life insurance policy was worth nearly $1.6 million. If he died, Monica stood to inherit it all. And with Robert by her side, she would have both the money and the man she desired. Love, greed, freedom. It was all within her reach. But in her desperation, she had underestimated two things: the precision of forensic science and the persistence of homicide detectives. Still, suspicion wasn't the same as conviction. The case was building, yes, but prosecutors needed more. They needed to show the world that this wasn't just a jealous lover's crime. This was a conspiracy. A cold, calculated murder for money plot. And to prove it, they would have to take Monica and Robert to trial, where every secret, every call, every betrayal would be laid bare for the world to see. The investigation had given detectives enough to charge, but charging was only the beginning. To prove Monica and Robert's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the case had to survive the bright lights and sharp edges of a Los Angeles courtroom. And when the trial began, the polished image Monica had carefully crafted for years began to crumble. On one side sat the prosecution, armed with forensics, records, and a narrative of greed and betrayal. On the other sat Monica and Robert, two lovers bound by a terrible secret, each hoping the other would take the fall. From the very first witness, the courtroom was gripped. Prosecutors began by walking the jury through the crime scene. Photographs of Fabio slumped by the pool. Images of the ransacked rooms. The stolen Porsche abandoned on a quiet street. But the pictures alone weren't what held the jurors' attention. It was the science behind them. A forensic expert pointed to the drop of blood inside the Porsche, the one mistake Robert Baker could never undo. It was his DNA, no one else's. Proof he had been there. Proof he had touched the car. Proof he had taken part in the killing. Robert's attorneys tried to explain it away. Maybe he borrowed the car before. Maybe the blood got there some other way. But the jurors weren't buying it. Too many coincidences, too many holes. Then came the phone records. Thousands of calls, dozens a day, stretching back months. Monica and Robert weren't just acquaintances. They weren't even just lovers. Their communication was constant, obsessive, almost impossible to hide. The prosecution laid out the timeline. Monica leaving the house, Robert arriving, the security system disabled, the murder itself. Every piece slotted neatly into place, painting a picture too chilling to ignore. And then the motive. Financial records showed Monica's growing debts, credit cards maxed out, spending habits outpacing income, and hanging over it all, the $1.6 million life insurance policy that named her as the beneficiary. Fabio's death wasn't just convenient. It was profitable. The jury sat in silence, eyes locked on Monica. But the defense fought back. Monica's lawyers painted her as a grieving widow caught in Robert's web. They argued Robert acted alone, fueled by obsession, hoping that by eliminating Fabio, Monica would run into his arms. Robert, for his part, didn't help himself. He shifted stories, sometimes admitting he was there, sometimes denying it, sometimes hinting Monica knew, sometimes insisting she didn't. His contradictions only deepened the suspicion that this was no simple crime of passion. And then, the most devastating testimony came not from experts or strangers, but from Monica herself. When she took the stand, jurors leaned forward. Her voice trembled, her tears flowed, but her words were careful. Too careful. She denied planning Fabio's death. She denied conspiring with Robert. She even denied loving him at all, calling him dangerous, unstable, manipulative. But the prosecution had her cornered. They confronted her with messages, intimate words, promises, plans, not the language of fear, but of desire. Not a woman distancing herself from a predator, but one binding herself to him. The courtroom shifted. Whispers spread across the gallery. Monica's performance wasn't convincing. The jury could see the cracks, and when closing arguments came, the picture was clear. The prosecution described a woman who wanted out of her marriage. A woman who wanted money, freedom, and excitement. A woman who found all of it in Robert Baker and who helped him take her husband's life to get it. The defense countered with pleas of reasonable doubt. But the evidence was too strong, the motive too clear, the timeline too damning. The jurors left to deliberate. Hours stretched into days. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Monica sat rigid, eyes forward, her daughters behind her, torn between love for their mother and grief for their father. Finally, the jury returned. The verdict would decide not just Monica and Robert's fate, but the legacy of Fabio Sementilli, the man who had given so much to his family and his industry, only to have it ripped away in one brutal act. The clerk stood. The room fell silent, and as the words rang out, Monica's face barely moved. She was found guilty. So was Robert. Monica and Robert were sentenced to life without parole, their freedom gone. For Isabella and her sister, life without their father was unbearable, every joy now tinged with grief. The courtroom gasped. For some, justice had finally been served. For others, it was a tragedy on top of a tragedy, the complete destruction of a family. But for the detectives who had followed the trail from a single drop of blood, the outcome confirmed what they had suspected from the very beginning. This was never a burglary. This was never random. It was betrayal. Cold, calculated, intimate. And yet, even as Monica was led away in handcuffs, one question still hung in the air. Why? Why had a glamorous life, a loving family, and a successful husband not been enough? Why had she risked everything, her freedom, her daughters, her future, for a man like Robert Baker? The answers weren't clear. Perhaps they never would be. The Sementilli story is a haunting reminder. Appearances deceive, and the people closest to us can sometimes bring the darkest harm. Trust can be deadly. Love can be lethal. If this case moved you, please take a moment to hit the like button. It helps us bring more awareness to stories like these. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next true crime story we uncover. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.